Hi everyone, Harry here to talk about Donald Trump's very predictable motion now to the New York trial court to take his sentencing off the books until after the election. Okay, first, a quick review of the bidding. He's convicted in the spring on 34 counts, and the sentencing might have occurred earlier even, but for a delay that the judge gave in order for there to be some litigation of his motion that the Supreme Court immunity decision changes things. So they have had that skirmish and litigation, and they want to say that the Supreme Court motion means there should be a new trial. We've talked about this before. Let me just say that the paying hush money to a porn star when you're not the president is not a very strong description of official action. But the Supreme Court has left Trump a lot of arguments, and specifically to argue some of the evidence introduced at trial shouldn't have been under the new Supreme Court motion. But that is a separate track. So Merchan heard arguments about that and is scheduled to decide it actually the 16th of September. Now, sentencing is a separate matter that is scheduled for the 18th of September. And so, it's coming up in about a little over a month. And Trump lobs in a letter brief today saying, you can't sentence me until after the election. So let me take a step back and point out the hypocrisy here. So Trump, at every turn where there's any attempt to speed things up by the government, they've sort of tiptoed but advert to the public's right to know, which is at least a nod in the direction of it would be useful when you go to the polls to know whether you're one of the candidates is a convicted felon or here a sentenced felon. They jump up and scream and say you're politicizing things. Now, the argument is by treating it normally and not pushing it until after the election, you're politicizing things. In other words, heads I win, tails you lose. And the core argument essentially by Trump is to schedule sentencing now instead of after the election has to be naked election interference. That's the actual argument. So a complete reversal of the normal stance he takes whenever the state or federal governments in any of these proceedings have sought to kind of push the courts to have proceedings before the election. Okay, so that is really his main argument, that it's election interference. Then there's a couple other things. First, bootstrapping on bootstraps, he says as to the recusal motion, you just denied it again yesterday, as indeed Merchan did, saying, innuendo doesn't make a conflict or give any reason to believe that I couldn't decide this case fairly just because my daughter has some involvement with Democratic consultants. But they're saying if you take the sentencing off track, then that worry about recusal will go away. But, what worry? And then finally, and this is going to be a preview, I think, of what we can expect from Trump after Merchan, I think, denies the holding and goes forward with sentencing. He says there's this whole immunity litigation going forward, as I referred, and so Merchan will be deciding on September 16th whether or not there should be a new trial. I think most people predict he won't so decide. Trump is saying, I'm going to appeal that right away, and because it's immunity, I get to do so and sort of freeze the linebackers. That's going to be an interesting and different issue than we've seen in the past. When on a motion for immunity, he can have an interlocutory appeal. That's what's caused all this mischief. That's what enabled the Supreme Court to put things on hold for 10 months and has totally interrupted what would otherwise be an orderly administration and trials in these other cases, that you have this special right not to be tried with immunity, and because that's what the right consists of. Do you have a special right not to have sentence pronounced? I tend to doubt it, but that will be the issue. He will go to, after Merchan, assuming he does, denies the immunity motion, he'll try to not simply appeal it immediately, which he can do, but say you must take sentencing off calendar. That to me is dubious, but in all these matters now we have at the end of the line a Supreme Court of the United States that is highly sympathetic to presidential immunity claims. There's no prejudice in particular to having the court pronounce sentence. Let me be clear, there certainly would be prejudice, and it would be problematic to throw him in the pokey during the campaign, of course. And that will not happen. If Merchan imposes a term of imprisonment, he will suspend it while Trump appeals that term, and that very appeal will take, say, a year. So there's no risk that he'll be put into jail, which of course would be a problem. But his claim is somehow that to simply have sentence pronounced. And he actually really gets down to what we're talking about by citing a little snippet from the Supreme Court opinion talking about the peculiar opprobrium, sort of bad smell that these proceedings bring up. So what he's really saying is it's political interference because Merchan, by sentencing him, is kind of subjecting him to a bad smell and sort of disrepute in the community, and that could affect the election. Of course, the answer on the other side is you committed the crime, you get sentenced. That's, you can't put that off just because you're a political figure. Imagine, if it were 2 years from now and he's running again, having lost, you could make the same argument. And even that argument is a way of saying you should interfere in the political process on my behalf by not imposing this opprobrium on me. And moreover, if you don't do the sentencing, you're interfering improperly. So if you really parse it, it's somewhat incoherent. Anyway, this is where the action will be. I suspect that Merchan will say, no, we're going ahead on the 18th, and Trump will try to use the immunity to say that even the pronouncement of sentence should be suspended because he's appealing while he appeals immunity, and we'll have to see in this new unsettled terrain what the state courts and United States Supreme Court does with that argument. Talk to you later. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.